Was I wrong for what I did? Honestly, I've replayed it 1,000 times in my head, the look on her face, the gasps from the courtroom, the way my husband's lawyer just deflated. My husband, or rather, my late husband, Richard, had been having an affair for years, a secret life with a woman named Serena, and he died suddenly, leaving behind a will that left almost everything to her. Can you imagine? After 25 years of marriage, building a life, a home, a business together, he was just going to hand it all over to some woman he'd been seeing behind my back? I don't know what kind of man does that, but I wasn't just going to stand there and let it happen. So I did something that many might call cruel, but I call it justice. Tell me, would you have done the same thing? Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I thought my life was, if not perfect, at least stable and predictable. Richard and I met in college. He was charming, ambitious, and made me laugh. I was a bit more reserved, focused on my studies, but he had a way of drawing me out. We dated for a few years, got married right after graduation, and started our lives together with big dreams. Richard went into construction, eventually starting his own firm, while I pursued my passion for interior design, often helping him with his clients. We bought a beautiful house, renovated it together, and even though we never had children, our life felt full. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I believed. Richard's business grew, and with it, our lifestyle improved. We took vacations, drove nice cars, and our home was always open to friends and family. I supported him through every late night, every stressful project, every financial setback. I was his rock, his confidant, his biggest cheerleader. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared subtly. Richard started working longer hours, which, in his line of work, wasn't unusual. But then the calls became more frequent, whispered conversations he'd take in another room. He'd come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself I was being paranoid. We were getting older, perhaps the spark had just dimmed a little. I blamed myself, wondering if I hadn't been attentive enough, if I'd let myself go. I even tried to spice things up, bought new lingerie, suggested weekend getaways, but he always seemed distant, preoccupied. The emotional intimacy we once shared slowly eroded, replaced by a polite formality. I confronted him once, gently, about the long hours and the phone calls. He got defensive, angry even, accusing me of not trusting him, of being insecure. He said I was stifling him, and that hurt deeply. I retreated, decided to give him space, hoping he'd eventually come back to me. I clung to the memories of our early years, of the love that had felt so real, so undeniable. I told myself it was just a phase, a difficult patch that every long-term marriage encounters. Then came the little things that, in hindsight, screamed infidelity. The sudden interest in a new, expensive cologne, the meticulous care he started taking with his appearance, not for me, it seemed. He started going to the gym, something he hadn't done in years. One evening, I found a silk scarf in the dryer that wasn't mine. It was a beautiful, expensive scarf, not something he would have bought for himself or me. When I asked him about it, he mumbled something about a client leaving it behind, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. My gut twisted. I knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. But I was afraid to acknowledge it, afraid of what it would mean for my life, for everything we had built. I became a detective in my own home, a role I never wanted. I checked his phone when he was in the shower, scoured his credit card statements. It was agonizing, each discovery a fresh wound. The hotel bookings, the restaurant bills for two that weren't with me, the expensive jewelry purchases that never materialized for our anniversaries or my birthdays. It was all there, laid bare in the cold, hard facts. The mistress, Serena. I found her name on a recurring charge, a florist, sending flowers to her office. I found her on social media, a younger woman, vibrant, beautiful, working as an architect, often collaborating with construction firms. My heart shattered into a million pieces. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. I felt like a fool, like my entire life had been a lie. I confronted Richard again, this time armed with evidence. I laid out the phone records, the credit card statements, the photo of Serena I'd found online. He denied it at first, vehemently, tried to turn it around on me, accusing me of invasion of privacy, of being unhinged. But I held my ground. I stared him down, my eyes probably blazing with a mixture of pain and fury. Finally, he broke. He confessed, mumbled an apology that felt hollow and meaningless, and admitted he'd been seeing Serena for 5 years. 5 years. A significant chunk of our marriage, a quarter of our time together. I asked him to leave. I couldn't bear to look at him, couldn't bear to be in the same house. He packed a bag and left, and the silence in our home was deafening. I spent the next few months in a haze of grief, anger, and despair. Friends rallied around me, offering comfort and support, but I felt utterly alone. I started divorce proceedings, but Richard, ever the businessman, dragged his feet, trying to minimize what I would get. He was careful, had kept assets separate, made it difficult for my lawyer to trace everything. It was a messy, drawn-out affair, and the emotional toll was immense. He wasn't malicious, exactly, just selfish. He wanted to move on with Serena with as little financial consequence as possible. I was tired, exhausted by the emotional warfare. I just wanted it to be over. Then, a few months into the divorce proceedings, before anything was finalized, Richard had a massive heart attack. He was gone, just like that. One moment, he was fighting me over alimony. The next, he was dead. The shock was profound. Despite everything, he had been my husband for so long. There was a strange mix of sorrow for the life we once had, and a bitter satisfaction that he wouldn't get to live out his happily ever after with Serena. But then came the bombshell that reignited all my anger and fueled my desire for revenge. Richard's lawyer, a smug, self-important man named Mr. Thompson, contacted me regarding the will. He informed me, with a thinly veiled smirk, that Richard had recently updated his will. And in this new will, Serena was the primary beneficiary. Almost everything, the house we built together, the significant portion of his business he still owned, the bulk of his investments, was left to her. I was left with a pittance, a small trust fund that wouldn't even cover my legal fees from the divorce. It was a final, cruel slap in the face from beyond the grave. I was furious. Beyond furious. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about dignity, about the 25 years I'd invested in that man and his life. He was trying to erase me completely, to pretend I had never existed, to reward his mistress with the fruits of my labor. Serena, of course, was delighted. She probably thought she had won. She even had the audacity to contact me, offering her condolences in a sickly sweet voice, practically rubbing it in my face. She said she was sorry for my loss and that Richard had always spoken highly of me, but that his heart had truly belonged to her in the end. It was infuriating. I knew, right then and there, that I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't let Richard's final act be this ultimate betrayal. I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for every woman who has ever been discarded and disrespected. I needed to find a way to make them both pay. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was devastated, heartbroken, and utterly wronged. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have just accepted it? Would you have fought back? How far would you have gone? Let me know your thoughts. I didn't just accept it. I decided to fight. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Ms. Davies, was as outraged as I was. She dug into Richard's affairs, trying to find any loophole, any way to contest the will. But Richard had been careful. The will was recent, properly executed, and clearly stated his intentions. It seemed ironclad. Serena and her lawyer were practically gloating. The court date was set, and I felt a knot of dread in my stomach, knowing that all my efforts might be in vain. I was prepared for the worst, but I wasn't going down without a fight. My lawyer was preparing a case based on undue influence, arguing that Serena had manipulated Richard into changing his will while he was in a vulnerable state. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. The day of the court hearing arrived, a crisp, cold morning that felt as bleak as my prospects. Serena was there, dressed impeccably, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, looked equally confident. I sat beside Ms. Davies, my heart pounding, trying to project an air of composure I didn't feel. The proceedings began. Mr. Thompson presented the will, highlighting its validity, painting a picture of Richard as a man who had simply found true love and wanted to provide for it. Serena dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, playing the grieving lover to perfection. My stomach churned. It was all a performance, a grotesque mockery of true grief and loyalty. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, then began her argument, methodically dissecting the circumstances, trying to show Richard's declining health and Serena's opportunistic behavior. She presented evidence of Richard's increasing dependency on Serena in the months before his death, how she had isolated him from friends and family. It was a strong argument, but the judge seemed unconvinced. Wills are notoriously difficult to overturn. Just as Ms. Davies was concluding, I felt a strange calm wash over me. A memory, long forgotten, surfaced with startling clarity. I remembered a conversation with Richard, years ago, shortly after we'd first gotten married. We were young, idealistic, and discussing our future, including what would happen if one of us passed away. He had always been very organized, very particular about legal documents. He had made a point of telling me, very seriously, that he had a fail-safe, a backup plan, just in case anything ever happened to him and the primary will was somehow lost or contested. He said he trusted me, and only me, with this information. He told me it was hidden in a safe deposit box, one he had opened solely in my name, with instructions that it was only to be accessed in the event of his death. He'd made me promise to never open it unless absolutely necessary. My mind raced. Could it be? Could there be another will? One he had forgotten about, or perhaps one he had intentionally kept hidden in case his affair was discovered and he wanted to protect me. It seemed like a long shot, a desperate hope, but I had to try. I whispered to Ms. Davies, explaining the memory, the safe deposit box. Her eyes widened. She quickly requested a brief recess, citing the discovery of new, potentially crucial evidence. Mr. Thompson objected vehemently, but the judge, intrigued, granted the recess. During the break, Ms. Davies and I raced to the bank. The safe deposit box was indeed there, registered solely in my name, just as Richard had said. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and sentimental trinkets, was a thick envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled out the contents. It was a will, dated 15 years earlier, meticulously drafted, signed, and witnessed. And it left everything to me. Every single penny, every asset, every piece of property, including the business. It even had a clause specifically disinheriting any future spouses or partners unless explicitly stated in a subsequent, equally formal amendment. This was the real will, the one he had made when he truly loved me, before Serena came into the picture. He had never formally revoked it, only made a new one. The legal technicality was subtle, but potentially devastating for Serena. A new will doesn't automatically revoke a prior one if the prior one contains specific non-revocation clauses, or if the new one doesn't explicitly state that all prior wills are revoked. This earlier will was not explicitly revoked by the later one, which only stated it was his latest will. It was a gamble, but a powerful one. We rushed back to the courtroom, the envelope clutched in my hand. The judge called the court back into session. Ms. Davies, with a newfound confidence, stood before the judge. Your Honor, she began. My client has just discovered a prior will executed by the deceased, Richard Adams, 15 years ago. This will, we contend, is the true and valid expression of Mr. Adams's final wishes, and was never formally revoked. She then presented the document to the judge. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mr. Thompson was on his feet instantly, sputtering objections, claiming it was a fabrication, a desperate last-ditch effort. But the judge, a stern woman known for her meticulous attention to detail, was already examining the document. Her eyes scanned the pages, paused on the signatures, the dates, the specific clauses. Serena, who had been looking smug moments before, watched with a growing horror on her face. Her smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief and dawning fear. The judge looked up, her gaze piercing. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, this document appears to be legitimate. It is properly witnessed and dated. Furthermore, it contains a clause stating that it can only be revoked by a subsequent will that explicitly states its intention to revoke all prior wills. She then turned her gaze to Serena's lawyer. Does the will you presented contain such a clause, explicitly revoking all prior wills? Mr. Thompson stammered, his face paling. Your Honor, the later will, it simply states it is the last will and testament of Richard Adams, intended to supersede all previous intentions. Supersede is not the same as explicitly revoke, Mr. Thompson, the judge stated, her voice sharp. Especially in light of a prior will that has such a specific non-revocation clause. She continued to read through the document, and a faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched her lips. This older will, it seems, has a stronger legal standing, given the specific wording. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Serena looked as if she'd been struck. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and the judge, a flicker of panic in their depths. The color drained from her face. She knew. She understood the legal implications. The later will, the one that left her everything, was likely invalid because it didn't specifically revoke this older, ironclad document. The judge announced her preliminary ruling. Given the presented evidence and the legal precedent regarding explicit revocation clauses in wills, the court finds strong grounds to consider the earlier will, dated 15 years ago, as the legally binding document expressing the deceased's final wishes. She then scheduled a formal hearing for the following week to finalize the details, but her words were clear. The game was over. I had won. Serena stared at me across the courtroom, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and defeat. The smugness was gone, utterly replaced by raw fury. She lunged forward, letting out a guttural cry, but her lawyer quickly restrained her. Mr. Thompson looked utterly defeated, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. The court clerk looked at me with a newfound respect, and even some of the spectators offered small, approving nods. I didn't gloat, not outwardly. But inside, there was a profound sense of vindication, of justice finally served. I had taken back what was rightfully mine. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The following week, the judge formally ruled in my favor, declaring the earlier will as the valid one. Serena received nothing. She tried to appeal, to fight it, but the legal standing of the earlier will was too strong. She lost everything she thought she had gained. The house, the business, the investments, it all reverted to me, the rightful heir. It was a complete and utter victory. The relief was immense, a heavy weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing that you can't just discard someone and expect to get away with it. I decided to sell the house Richard and I had built, filled with too many bittersweet memories. I used some of the funds to establish a foundation in my name, supporting women's empowerment and legal aid for those facing similar situations. I also decided to take some time for myself, to travel, to rediscover who I was outside of Richard. It was a long journey of healing, but I was finally free. Serena vanished from the public eye, presumably humiliated and bankrupt. I heard rumors she had to move back in with her parents, and that the architect firm she worked for let her go due to the negative publicity. The justice was sweet, a stark reminder that karma has a way of catching up. I had thought I had lost everything, but in the end, I gained so much more than just material wealth. I gained my self-respect back. It was a long, arduous fight, filled with heartache and betrayal. But in the end, I stood firm, and I won. I learned that sometimes, the past holds the key to the future, and that even in the darkest moments, there can be a path to justice. So, like this video if you were on my side, if you think I did the right thing. Subscribe for more stories like this, where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges and find their strength. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.